Sadhu. All instructions that are given to us in the suttas, in the discourses, pretty much point back to the body. This physical body, this experience of living. Which takes place here in this present moment. It doesn't take place in the future. It doesn't take place in the past. It's relevant. It's present. It is involved with the living experience. And essentially, the Dhamma appears and disappears in the present moment, within the person's heart. An example of this we can see in the way feelings come up, thoughts, sensations, concepts, consciousness or sense awareness. They appear and they disappear. They appear, they disappear. Where? When? In the present. The loudest place where this can be seen, experienced, is within the body. So the body becomes the foundation where everything coalesces, comes together. The body is like the grounding. It's like if you're working with electricity, for example, there's the hot wire and there's also the grounding wire, the thing that needs to be grounding in order for electricity to really do its thing. To be functioning. So the body allows us to become engaged with life. And the Dhamma is always about engagement. Anyhow, it is engaged. And the best tool for this the Buddha gave us is the 4 satipatthanas. Kāyanupassana, Vedanupassana, Cittanupassana, and Dhammanupassana. Mindfulness directed to the body in the form of the breath, movement, becoming cognizant of the different positions, whether it's sitting, standing, walking, or laying down, as well as the different functions that take place. So we experience the reality of life thanks to and with the help of the body. And what is the body? We look at the body as nama-rupa, nama-rupa. Sometimes they're called mentality and materiality. Rupa part of the body involves the 4 great elements: earth, fire, water, and air. Of course, earth not in the sense of actual soil and things. We're talking about the qualities of these great elements. Like earth would be the solidity, like the bones, for example, tissues, things that, at least for a brief moment, if not most of the time, are more tangible. Water is more of the fluidity that is necessary, the liquidy part. For example, saliva, blood. Fire is what also animates, it gives life, it burns, it is heat. So it's the heat nature that is found within the body. So long as the person is alive, the heat element will be there, present in them. Even if the person goes all the way to cessation of feeling and perception, that is the one element that will be there intact. Of course, they have many, many manifestations, these four great elements. And then there's the air, which also is hollowness, the spaciousness. You can think of them as the tiny little spaces, nooks and crannies within the body. The spaces, the separations between one organ versus the other. The cavities, the gaseous presence when we eat something, for example. And the body also itself is producing gases. And it also has subtle characteristics, such as the functioning of the mind, for example, can also be seen as a manifestation of air sometimes. How freely thoughts move about. So when we say four great elements, we're talking about these and then much more than that. In that sense, we look at the rupa, and then the nama comes in. Nama has the other four aggregates. Vedana, the feeling part. Feelings come and then they disappear. Then comes sanya. Sanya are like the labels, the assumptions we have, the thinking we have. Concepts. Memories is another way of looking at them. And then we have the sankharas, which are the mental constructions, the conjurings, the things that habitually the mind is used to constructing. You give them a memory, guess what? It's going to create Tower of Babylon with it. And then we look at vijnana, which is the last of these aggregates, comprising the fullness of nama, sense awareness, consciousness. So you can also approach the body's mindfulness of the body in the form of just observing nama rupa. When I say just, of course, you can see how these are gateways, these are doorways to understanding the tilakkana, the three characteristics of existence that the Buddha talked about, realized the night of his enlightenment, awakening. And these are anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, dissatisfaction, suffering, the turmoil that exists within oneself. That we're trying to get rid of, understand, go beyond. And then the non-substantiality, the non-selfness, the non-identification with this me, this is who I am, which he called anatta. There is no soul as such, a separate being that goes unchanged from life to life. So by looking inward at the body, we are opening the gateway. We are looking, it's a shorter access road, if you like, to seeing these three characteristics of existence live as they happen. So we cannot penetrate the Dhamma by mere intellect, for example, or logic, or just reason. We come to the reality of experience that is immediate through this body, the immediacy of this experience that takes place now. By keeping mindfulness really close, in close proximity of what is taking place with the body here and now. Keeping it close, keeping a close eye. So mindfulness then is crucial. Ajahn Mahabua, for example, one of the 20th centuries, I believe he also lived into the beginning part of the 21st century, if I'm not mistaken. He would say, we need to sharpen mindfulness. It's like a scalpel, so sharp. And wisdom relies on mindfulness. Oftentimes we forget that wisdom without mindfulness, the consistent presence of mindfulness, can become just another form of sanya, another concept, another unlived concept, unlived experience that people attach themselves to. So that is different than panya. So panya needs protection, the protection of of sati, I'm sorry. And that's another thing which Ajahn Mahabua beautifully describes as is like, he says, it's like the bank of the river that holds the river in check. If you think of panya or wisdom or discernment as the flowing of the river, the banks are the things that keep it steady. They show it the way, and the river follows. So these two, sati and panya, mindfulness and wisdom, they need to be present when we are directing our attention, our awareness to the body. Otherwise, it can be overwhelming. I've had people who came and said, Bhante, even before I became ordained, I'm so overwhelmed with so much data that's coming in through the senses. That is mindfulness gone off whack. The person has become so enmeshed, so tight, and we get headaches. We're too top heavy in one or the other attributes of the four elements. So, bringing the attention back to the body. And I'm mentioning these principles today because they are highly relevant to the topic today that we're going to be, or the conversation that takes place between Lord Buddha and Venerable Sāriputta, and how the conversation, the discussion, the discourse, in a sense, goes. So, through the interaction with life that takes place thanks to the body in a mindful and wise and discerning way, we open the doors to the deathless, thanks to the Dhamma. It's available, so long as the person is able to bring in the attention that's floating around. It's most of the time when people talk about anicca, dukkha, anatta, it's more of an intellectual affair. But the body reminds us that it is no, it's very real. And it's happening all the time. So bringing in Both of these together, as the attention comes down to the body, is essential to keep the Dhamma alive. Otherwise, it's just conceptual. The Dhamma is not conceptual. Nibbāna is not conceptual. It doesn't take place in the future. It doesn't take place somewhere else. It doesn't take place after death. It takes place in the heart, within oneself. And when the defilements show up, they don't show up somewhere else in the future or in the past. They're showing up here in the present moment. Here in the body, as demonstrated in the body, the functionings of the body. So, moving away from the mind, just conceptually bringing it here, is also taking the power away from the deceitful kileshas. Kileshas are the defilements. So we're stripping the power that we've given again and again and again to the kileshas, such as kileshas like to label things, to give us a relationship with the outside world, meaning cutting us off from the body. Kileshas are the ones who say, I like this. Oh, I don't like that. This is beautiful. That is ugly. Oh, we're going to keep the ugly away from us. I don't want to have anything to do with this. And sometimes they can come across as also Dhamma, even in the disguise of Dhamma, but they're just kileshas. It's a counterfeit Dhamma, if you will. It's not the real Dhamma. But how do we know? We need to bring it into the reality that is taking place in the present moment, within the body. See, your breath never lies. The body never lies. But oftentimes, we are hovering in the territory of sanya. We're disassociated from sati. Sati is not there to see what's really happening to the breath, for example. So, here we have Venerable Sāriputta being, if you like, the protagonist of this story, where you have the Sangha coming out of the rains retreat, which is a 3-month period. And at the end of the retreat, so the Sangha stays in one location. So it's meant to have the monastics practice diligently, so they don't go off to go to Pindapada or elsewhere to teach. Usually the people are the ones who come, the food is brought to them. And at the end of the rains retreat, there are certain practices that monastics do, like the Vinaya recitations and things. But at the end of that, we have Venerable Sāriputta approaching Lord Buddha and asking if he could go off into the countryside and do some walking, in a sense. Walking, and how we see that is they would go away on Pindapada with their bowls, outer robe, and they would be gone for a few weeks or months or more, going from village to village. But in the case of a chief disciple like Venerable Sāriputta, that would also mean that he had many, many students with him, accompanying him. So he wouldn't be going off by himself unless he chose to. But in this case, he is taking his leave along with his monks, his disciples, from the Buddha. And what happens is there is the tradition where Venerable Sāriputta approaches Lord Buddha, and after paying homage to him, he says, Lord, this is my plan, this is what I am requesting, if I may be allowed to do. And the teacher says, yes, do as you see fit. That's convenient for you. And then the tradition goes something like, he being the teacher of his own monastics, of his own monk students, he would recite their names, just very like, who will be accompanying me type of a thing. So he says, Bhante, these are the following monks that will be accompanying, joining me. And he would just point name, I mean, highlight, or just their family name or their first name, etc. One monk, for whatever reason, Venerable Sāriputta forgets to mention his name. And you have to understand the number of Sangha members sitting there around the Buddha. And people are people. So there's everyone who has not become an arahant, shall we say, is vying for Lord Buddha's attention, or attention, period. And here is the chief disciple, the second in wisdom to Lord Buddha. So obviously that's a big deal. And the attention and the aura around Venerable Sāriputta is pretty massive among the monastics. So there's one particular monk who apparently remains nameless. We don't know his name. He comes and complains to Lord Buddha right after Venerable Sāriputta and his group of monks leave. He was supposed to also be in the group, by the way. But because his name gets to be omitted, he feels, and other issues apparently were also brewing. We can look at it in a psychology, from the psychological standpoint or the social standpoint, frustrations and all that, and the jealousy. So these things urge him to kind of stay behind and go straight to the Buddha. So let us jump into the sutta. And again, when questions come up, I request that we keep them at the end, if possible, unless it's extremely urgent for some reason. So let us start.
Sihanāda Sutta, the lion's roar. At one time, the Blessed One was abiding in the monastery offered by Anathapindika at Jeta's Grove in the city of Savatthi. Then the Venerable Sāriputta approached the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, sat to one side and said, Bhante, I have completed the rains retreat in Savatthi, and I would like to go to the countryside on a tour. Sāriputta, you may do what you think is suitable, replied the Blessed One. Then the Venerable Sāriputta, rising from his seat, and after paying homage and circumambulating the Blessed One by keeping him on his right side, went away. Soon after the Venerable Sāriputta had gone, a certain Bhikkhu said to the Blessed One, Bhante, Venerable Sāriputta offended me by hitting me, and although he hurt me, he went off to the countryside on a tour without even offering me an apology for what he did.
So basically, the commentators tell us that the edge of the robe, as you can imagine, there's so many monks sitting together, and so many monks also bowing to Lord Buddha before they leave. At that moment, one of the monks, this particular monk, who's accusing, complaining to Lord Buddha about Venerable Sāriputta, apparently the edge of the hem, perhaps, of the robe accidentally rubbed against his face. So he takes it to, several octaves higher, and it goes to Lord Buddha and says, he struck me in the face. That's what, they go deeper into it in the commentaries. So he struck me, and he never offered me, an apology, and instead he just took off and went off. So I'm here, sitting here, I refuse to go with him because, I'm offended. So obviously he's not, qualified to be a chief disciple type of a thing. All these things are happening, and this is always an opportunity for Lord Buddha, it seems, from going through the suttas and seeing incidents, although rare, but when they do occur, Lord Buddha does not miss a beat in calling over his chief disciple or an arahant, and says to a monk, please go tell him the teacher calls you. Not that he doubts necessarily their innocence, but simply because of the opportunity that this is creating for a further teaching to be developed, and also to enhance the faith and the confidence of the Sangha members, because we have to remember, not everyone was an Arya Savaka, not everyone was a noble disciple there. Not everyone was an Arahant or an Anagami, or even had the right view. But they were monks. Sometimes monks for many, many vassas. So the Buddha, being the teacher that he was, he would allow his students to come to the forefront and teach. And also to create that cohesion and union within the Sangha, so it doesn't fall apart. So these are some of the elements that are taking place in the background. Let's go, continue.
Then the Blessed One addressed a certain bhikkhu. Come, bhikkhu, go to Sāriputta, and in my name say to him, Friend Sāriputta, the teacher calls you. And that bhikkhu, having consented to deliver the message, went and caught up to the Venerable Sāriputta and said, Friend Sāriputta, the teacher calls you. And the Venerable Sāriputta started heading back in order to see the Blessed One. Meanwhile, both Venerable Mahamoggallana and Venerable Ananda were going from door to door with keys to the various monastic quarters, calling all bhikkhus to gather at the meeting hall, saying, Venerable ones, come right away. Come quickly, venerables. The Venerable Sāriputta will roar his lion's roar in the presence of the Blessed One. Come quickly. Then,
this is a big deal, as you can tell. The Buddha is known to give the lion's roar, and the lion's roar has to do with the declaration. It's a declaration of the authenticity, the oneness of the person's character with right view, at the very least, even if they're not an arahant. And the Buddha gave legitimacy also to all his noble disciples who have seen the truth with the eye of Dhamma, with right view. When the moment is there, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when it is there, to speak from the heart, the truth that is the Dhamma. And it's a one voice. It's indistinguishable from the voice of Lord Buddha. That's why it's a lion's roar. So in these incidents, in these events, when they do take place, there's a tremendous reaffirmation of the Dhamma. So it kind of reboots the power of Dhamma. It strengthens its legitimacy. no matter the time period. So Venerables Ananda and Mahamoggallana, you can almost feel like the Buddha also like looked at these two monks, Venerable Mahamoggallana and Ananda, is like, okay, go tell everyone, this is going to be big. And obviously Venerable Mahamoggallana would also know with his mind, because he was the second only to the Buddha in his psychic abilities. So the thoughts of other beings were never obscure to him. So he would see everyone's thoughts if he wanted to. So he knew what was happening. So they go around, and the keys were necessary. They're like the master keys in the monastery. In Savatthi, in the Anathapindika's monastery, it's pretty huge. And so it was very sophisticated. It was the peak of, how they would construct monasteries in those days. So, and sometimes bhikkhus would have left, or they're there in the hall, or they're for some reason in the room. And they didn't want to have such bhikkhus miss out on this opportunity of hearing Venerable Sāriputta give his lion's roar, which would be very rare. So, and it would be remembered for many, many years. And who knows, maybe by listening rather to the Venerable give his lion's roar, individuals could even taste the truth that is the Dhamma by experiencing Nibbāna. That's why in the beginning of our sit today, I mentioned the importance of just listening to the desana, not with the mind, not with the rational mind or like some intellectual endeavor, but listening to it through the heart, allowing the words that we're listening to seep in. Because yes, Nibbāna can even take place when the mind is ready and is not holding on to anything and just fully there. Many people have attained Sotapanna stage, Sakadagami stage, Anagami stage, even Arahantship by merely listening, not just hearing, listening to the Dhamma. So that's another reason why they were kind of like pulling everybody, just, lassoing them to the hall. So let's continue.
The Venerable Sāriputta approached the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, sat to one side. Once seated, the Blessed One said, Sāriputta, one of your companions in the holy life has made an accusation against you. He states that you offended him by hitting and hurting him and then going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend the companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, people keep throwing into the earth all things that are pure and impure, clean and dirty, whether it be feces, urine, saliva, pus, or blood, but the earth accepts them all without shrinking away, nor becoming humiliated or disgusted by any of it. In the same manner, Bhante, I live with an accepting heart that is the same as the earth's, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, people keep washing things in water, all things that are pure and impure, clean and dirty, whether it be feces, urine, saliva, pus, or blood. But water accepts and washes them all without shrinking away, nor becoming humiliated or disgusted by any of it. In the same manner, Bhante, I live with an accepting heart that is the same as water, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, people keep burning in fire all things that are pure and impure, clean and dirty, whether it be feces, urine, saliva, pus, or blood. But fire accepts and burns them all without shrinking away nor becoming humiliated or disgusted by any of it. In the same manner, Bhante, I live with an accepting heart that is the same as fire, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will.
Here we see a series of actually 9 declarations. The Venerable Sāriputta uses 9 different references. In this case, he used the earth, Mother Earth. It's so expansive. And, water, and then fire. And we're going to see air as well. And but as he's describing, if you recall earlier when I was mentioning the 4 great elements that can be seen within the body in the form of rupa, and his emphasis on if I were to be someone who was not established in the mindfulness of the body, meaning he was living in his head, in concepts, in thoughts, in assumptions, therefore not present, then it would be possible for such a ignorant person to keep hitting people and not become aware of it and go off on his own. So the immediacy of living experience is together with consistent presence of mindfulness, which is crowned by wisdom all throughout. But at the same time, we're seeing here a human element where a person is being accused, apparently unjustly. And in the case of Venerable Sāriputta, definitely unjustly, given his reputation as being so forbearing, so forgiving. So he is declaring these things, but also declaring his innocence, but at the same time, allowing the listeners to reconnect back to the body and its importance, because sometimes a person might look at, for example, the anapanasati, the breath meditation, with some well, it's not that big of a deal type of a thing, or awareness of the body is not that something to write home about, but it is very powerful. It can take one straight to Nibbāna, to arahantship. But it can also anchor oneself in the body, in the living experience, and in one's connection with the world, in the present moment, and other people in our interactions. So again, if there are questions, please, if you can, jot them down so we can address them once these are done.
Bhante, If I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, people keep throwing into the air all things that are pure and impure, clean and dirty, whether it be feces, urine, saliva, pus, or blood. But the air accepts and diffuses them by taking them all away without shrinking away, nor becoming humiliated or disgusted by any of it. In the same manner, Bhante, I live with an accepting heart that is the same as air, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, people use a cleaning rag to wipe all things that are pure and impure, clean and dirty, whether it be feces, urine, saliva, pus, or blood. But the cleaning rag accepts and wipes them all away without shrinking away, nor becoming humiliated or disgusted by any of it. In the same manner, Bhante, I live with an accepting heart that is the same as the cleaning rag, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, just as an outcast boy or girl in torn clothes with the begging basin in hand would enter into a village or town with a humble mind, in the same manner, Bhante, I live with an accepting heart that is the same as an outcast boy or girl in torn clothes with the begging basin in hand that would enter a village or town with a humble mind, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, just like a domesticated and tamed bull devoted to people, with its horns cut off, would wander from street to street and from square to square, without hurting anyone, whether with its feet or horns. In the same manner, Bhante, I live with an accepting heart that is the same as the domesticated bull, devoted to people, with its horns cut off, wandering from street to street and from square to square, without hurting anyone, whether with its feet or horns, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, just like a young and youthful woman or a man who enjoys adornments, who after cleaning oneself and bathing from head to toe would shrink away and become humiliated and disgusted if someone were to place the festering carcass of a dead dog or a dead snake around their neck. In the same manner, Bhante, I live with a heart that shrinks away and becomes humiliated and disgusted by this putrid physical body. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology.
If you just listen to this sutta once, or just know this sutta, you get a very powerful and concise introduction or an understanding of the Dhamma with its sila, samadhi, and panya portions, with its focus on virtue, discipline, morality, cultivation of mind, and of wisdom. Here in these examples, with these repetitions that drive the point home, we see how Venerable Sāriputta is breaking down the various different techniques of the application of mindfulness and observation of the physical body as a means, as a tool to attain Nibbāna. It also is talking about what we were saying earlier about the three characteristics of existence being ever present within, not outside necessarily, but definitely within the body. It's unavoidable, inescapable, such as the image of the young boy or girl when, or woman or man who just took a nice shower and they're so clean, and somebody comes in and puts a dead body of a snake or a dog, a carcass, a festering. Of course, it's deplorable. We can't even mentally accept the image of that in our mind, let alone do it. So when the person has developed the type of practice that looks at the body in that fashion, then the body becomes a burden. So they don't have anything to really be attracted to within the body. There are other times where, as Venerable Sāriputta is getting older and he's having a discussion with fellow noble disciples, and he says, everything is leaking. This body is leaking. Whether it's the sweat glands, whether it's urine, whether it's, passing gas, all these things, wounds that are not healing as fast or ever, things falling apart. So all of these things can be used as a method to bring mindfulness home, and develop wisdom. These two things are absolutely essential to attain Nibbāna. You cannot attain without these two. It's impossible. So here we have Venerable Sāriputta go with these 9, and this is from the Book of Nines, so that's how it is arranged. So and the commentary also says that with each of these declarations of a lion's roar, the earth shook. People felt it, they say. The commentaries do say that. I don't know if that's the case, but you can imagine, even listening or reading these paragraphs, one can not help but feel somewhat shaken with their truthfulness and genuineness, knowing the kind of life that Venerable Sāriputta had lived. Let's continue.
Bhante, if it were to be someone who had not established himself in the mindfulness of the body, then such a person could offend a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Bhante, just like someone using a leaky and cracked frying pan where the boiling oil keeps leaking and dripping out, in the same manner, Bhante, I live in this leaky and cracked physical body that keeps dripping and leaking. Bhante, if I were not established in the mindfulness of the body, then I would have offended a companion in the holy life by hitting and hurting him and going off to the countryside on a tour without offering him an apology. Then that accusing bhikkhu got up from his seat and by arranging his robe on one shoulder, placed his head at the Blessed One's feet and said, Blessed Lord, please forgive me for my transgression, in that I accused the Venerable Sāriputta baselessly, using a false accusation as I slandered against him, owing to my hateful foolishness and delusion. Bhante, may the Blessed Lord please forgive me for my transgression for the sake of future restraint. Bhikkhu, indeed you have committed a transgression here, as you baselessly accused and slandered the Venerable Sāriputta, owing to your hateful foolishness and delusion. But as you see your fault and ask for forgiveness by making amends for it according to the Dhamma, we accept your forgiveness for this transgression. After all, Bhikkhu, in the Noble One's discipline, it is seen as growth when someone sees their transgression as a fault and asks for pardon by making amends for it according to the Dhamma for the sake of future restraint. Then the Blessed One addressed the Venerable Sāriputta and said, Sāriputta, forgive this foolish man before his head splits open and is cut into 7 pieces right here and now. Surely, Bhante, I will forgive him the moment he says, Bhante, please forgive me.
Powerful scene, isn't it? Imagine being that person and you just heard Venerable Sāriputta, the person you wrongfully accused out of jealousy and all those things, give his whole 9-sectioned declarations. And all the monks, you can't help it. You're dealing with human beings. You can't help but see the other monks kind of glancing over their shoulders and looking at this monk and saying, how dare you? How dare you? And he has to, at the end of this, go back to being, back to normal business. So obviously, it is earth-shattering. And I would love to think also that it really put a dent. It really made this monk feel, I really, really did a wrong act here, and quickly go and bow to Lord Buddha and then ask for forgiveness for what he did. So in the Vinaya, we have certain rules. And when a person approaches becoming cognizant of the fact that they have had a misdemeanor, they acknowledge the fact that they did a wrongful act for whatever type that is forgivable in a sense, with admission. Here, he has taken charge of his own responsibility of his action and came forward and is asking for forgiveness. When a bhikkhu is able to do that, then based on the Vinaya, and is acknowledging the fact and is demonstrating to the remaining bhikkhus that yes, he looks like he's being genuine, then for the sake of him not doing it again in the future, and his acknowledgement, as demonstrated with his acknowledgement now, the Sangha would go ahead, in this case, in the body of Lord Buddha, being the chief, is forgiven. However, it is always essential for the accuser, who is now proven to be unjustly accusing someone, so he's in the wrong, to go and ask forgiveness from the individual whom he accused or she accused. And that is where Lord Buddha comes in and says, Sāriputta, forgive this idiot, because if you don't forgive him, his head would split open in 7 pieces. And in the suttas, we see that there is several instances where usually depicted as Sakka, the king of the gods, who would stand in with his celestial trident, if you will, weapon. And sometimes they're also seen as some form of a yakka, a different being, a powerful being, who hovers over the person who accused, a just person, an innocent person. And if they don't ask for forgiveness and forgiven, they will suffer the consequences. There are also instances, just a side note, where if the Lord Buddha asks a person a question 3 times and they don't answer, guess what? Sakka shows up. We're ready to split open the person's head into 7 pieces. So, but they usually give the person in question an image where they do see Sakka is like sharpening the trident. Is like, okay. So just a side note, because there was an incident where a fellow bhikkhu one time, I forgot his name, it starts with a K, wrongfully accused both the chief disciples, Venerable Maha, Moggallana, and Sāriputta. And in that incident as well, Lord Buddha called them over, and it was actually jealous, and he was saying that they are conspiring to take over the Sangha from Lord Buddha. So he was flat out lying, and the Buddha later on asks him, please, you just go ahead and admit your mistake, otherwise you're going to suffer. And he doesn't. And he developed boils and he dies. So this is a wonderful sutta to not just because of the Sihanāda, the lion's roar part. Again, like I mentioned last week, there are several suttas dealing with addressing this topic of the lion's roar, or Sihanāda. We have, for example, the Mahasihanāda and the Chula Sihanāda suttas in the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle length discourses. This is from the Anguttara Nikāya, or the numerical discourses. that demonstrate the patience of Venerable Sāriputta. And fortunately, this is not the only sutta that discusses that special quality that is also there as a benchmark, a yardstick, a measure for other bhikkhus to follow. For example, in the Dhammapada, in I believe it's verse 389, Vagga 389, and also probably 390, where Lord Buddha says, a holy person who is truly holy is unable to hit anyone in anger, because anger doesn't exist. And even if they are stricken by someone, if somebody strikes them, they cannot retaliate. So that Vagga from the Dhammapada, in the commentaries, we see and read how this was about another example of Venerable Sāriputta's forbearance and patience, where one time a group of Venerable Sāriputta's students were sitting together in a square and they were talking about the greatness of their teacher and how forbearing and loving and patient he is, forgiving. And there was one single Brahmin, an old Brahmin who was not one of their followers or anything. He says, hogwash, there can't be such a person. I will show you how your teacher is just, it's just skin deep, his forbearance. I will show you how he can get angry. And they say, don't say that. He's a holy man. He's a chief disciple. Anyhow, they forget about the whole incident. And then it so happens that Venerable Sāriputta is walking on his Pindapada through the village, and this Brahmin comes from the back and slaps him in the back of Venerable Sāriputta. He just, with full force. And obviously he's shaken, and Venerable Sāriputta does not even turn around to inquire what happened. He just says, what was that? And then fixes himself and continues with his bowl. He just continues. Now, it only takes a few milliseconds for this person who just assaulted a holy person to just realize, oh no, what did I do? Apparently he is what they said he is. And he quickly runs over and gets on his knees and bows down to the Venerable Sāriputta and says, please forgive me. And he says, for what? He says, I'm the one who hurt you. I'm the one who struck you over there from the back, because I didn't think you had it in you to be that patient. No one I know is that patient. But I didn't see a tiny little iota of anger from you. You obviously are a noble person, holy person. So please, as a token of granting me pardon, please come to my home for your meal. And Venerable Sāriputta is like, okay. So he goes and has lunch, and at the end, now the Buddha, the Venerable Sāriputta didn't have just monastic followers, he also had lay followers who also saw what happened. And now they were raging mad. And they just wanted to beat the guy to death. And as Venerable Sāriputta is leaving the home of this person who perpetrated him, I don't know whether he was trying to protect himself or whether Venerable Sāriputta was trying to protect him. He gives him the bowl. And usually a layperson can take the bowl and just, as a matter of courtesy, follow along with the bhikkhu or to their home. Now these people came in and huddled up and wanted to beat him, and Venerable Sāriputta intervened, and he said, what are you doing? And they said, Venerable, he assaulted you, so we want to punish him. And he said, whom did he assault? And they say, you, Venerable. And he said, yes, it was I who got assaulted, but I forgive him. So what's your qualm about? And they just are completely stunned. And so he takes the bowl and goes to the monastery. Everybody goes to their destinations. And as it was customary, the monks go and report this incident to Lord Buddha. And Lord Buddha says this in a different verse in the Dhammapada, and he says, the Holy One is like the earth, accepts whatever is thrown into it, which we also saw here in this sutta of the Anguttara Nikāya. So there are many examples of Venerable Sāriputta's incredible humility. There's a sutta, the Susima Sutta from the Samyutta Nikāya, the kindred or linked, connected discourses. In the commentary of that particular sutta, I recall it says how one time Venerable Sāriputta is walking in the monastery, and a young, newly ordained 7-year-old novice boy turns to him and says, "Hey, your robe is touching the ground, the floor. It's dusty. What are you doing? Lift it up." 7-year-old, when I was 7, I was just, unbearable. Imagine a 7-year-old child speaking, actually scolding the chief disciple. And Venerable Sāriputta doesn't think about status, doesn't think about, hey, I am the chief disciple, and plus, I'm an adult. Who are you? He quickly stands aside, rearranges his lower robe, because it was the lower robe, the under robe that we have. So he fixes it, lifts it up, and rearranges it, and then he bows to the 7-year-old in Anjali, in the hands clasped in front of him in form of venerating one's teacher. And he says, "It is now in order, teacher, teacher." Less than a year ago, I was in a situation where I recounted this incident to another person who happened to be in robes as well. I was in robes, they were in robes. And this individual did not believe that Venerable Sāriputta could do such a thing. They said it's impossible for Venerable Sāriputta to have bowed down to a 7-year-old. I said, "Bhante, it's in the suttas, it's in the commentaries. Go ahead. I'm not making anything up. This was lived by Venerable Sāriputta." So this was an invitation for me to also reaffirm to myself the importance of forbearance in our lives, and not to be caught up in status, etc. To this day, Venerable Sāriputta's example is unprecedented. And as a bhikkhu, I can say, I know all of you are lay students here in this platform today, but it's very easy for us to get caught up in status, and especially as bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And this is a warning, I guess, or rather precaution for us not to fall into these traps of status. I'm a teacher, I'm of a certain level of vassas or rains retreats I have. That's how you count out seniority, type of a thing. But essentially it is meaningless, absolutely meaningless in my own understanding, to lose one's humanity and raise up the level of vassas, or the amount of years that one has collected under his belt. It's like tree rings, the humanity has to be there first and foremost for a teacher to truly exemplify what they're teaching. And for that, we owe it to Lord Buddha and all his sāvakas all his students, arahants, and all the disciples. So I wanted to share these other side notes and suttas so you get a different or a little bit fuller image of Venerable Sāriputta's forbearance. Thank you for indulging me and listening. And I would like to now open for any questions and comments, thoughts, critiques you might have. But please go ahead and start speaking because I won't be able to see often.
Thanks very much for the talk, Bhante.
Yes.
I believe that the sutta that you read to us ended with Venerable Sāriputta requesting forgiveness from the monk who supposedly falsely accused him as well. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, were you done, Upatissa?
Yes, I'm done.
Some translators do add that section, while others don't. And in one of the Pali versions I read, it didn't have that. And that is the one that I actually used in retranslating the sutta. But based on other incidents from Venerable Sāriputta's life, he had a tendency, and it was also promoted, you can say, from various different examples seen throughout the suttas of the person who was accused to go ahead and at the end to ask, once the forgiveness was given, the pardon was given to the person who came and said, I'm sorry, I apologize for my accusation. And the person, the bhikkhu in question would say, I forgive you. And from my side, if I have offended you, please, I ask for your forgiveness. And yes, many incidents are like that, including when on his deathbed, Venerable Sāriputta, when he was in his own mother's home, whom he had taught, and that last night of his life, because of his teaching, she became a Sotapanna, so she was established in right view. He says, now my nursing fee is given in full. Madam, you may go now. And then he sees that he's because he had dysentery, severe dysentery, so he was leaking blood in this case, literally. So he calls over, he asks Chunda, his attending monk, he says, Chunda, what time is it? And he says, Bhante, it's late, and it's like early in the morning. He says, call the other monks, because he had gone to his family home to pay his respect and to teach Dhamma to his mother, which he just did successfully. And he calls over the monks, and then he says to them, he asks for their forgiveness, to your point. He says, if by any chance, at any point, in any of the times that we've lived together, if you've seen me do something wrong and hurtful, and I've somewhat hurt you, I kindly ask for your forgiveness. And they say, Bhante, how could you say that? You know. So they say yes, and you know, because Venerable Sāriputta was like a mother. And I think it's in the Majjhima Nikāya Middle Length Discourses number 141 or 145, where Lord Buddha, in highlighting and pointing out the significance of both chief disciples, he says, Venerable Sāriputta is like the mother, and Venerable Mahamoggallana is like a nurse. And in context, the context was when a student came in to learn from Venerable Sāriputta, he would be the perfect one to establish them in right view. Basically, they would attain the first stage, Sotapanna. So he was the person, because it is the hardest out of all four. So, and then he would just pass them on to Venerable Mahamoggallana. Okay, you take over. And he would take them straight to arahantship in the way he taught them. So he was like a mother. And so, yes, thank you for that comment, Upatissa. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
Go ahead. Somebody else wanted to talk. So.
Well, you're here now. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, I thought that the thank you. The explanation you gave for me of the Namarupa, and it's talking about the you know, the gateways of the body. I was taking some notes, but it really kind of clarified for me the, you know, this kind of body-mind divide that we have, you know, more in the West. So, you know, it actually, yeah, I thought it's a really very, very schematic, although with, you know, feeling, but very clear. And my question was, if you are not so practiced or sensitive, then isn't it possible that your body and mind give you false signals sometimes, or, you know, get confused? You know, you think your body is warm, but actually it's cold, or in a manner of speaking, or, you know, you get this, if you're not so practiced or sensitive, then your body and mind would give you these fake, you know, fake beeps and more confusion, right? Maybe that's why meditation is, and, you know, practice is kind of essential to distinguish, because many times I can't quite, you know, I cannot quite get it correctly and make mistakes, you know.
Thank you, Russell, for the question. There's different levels of wisdom, you know, just like there's different levels of ignorance, different levels of understanding. And yes, I agree with you on sometimes the information comes in, the mind makes it up to be something that it is not. A grosser example of this might be someone who is not hungry, but feeling depressed or sad. And they want to do something, so they reach for the refrigerator door and they start eating things. So meanwhile, a person who had the ability to check in with the body by asking, hey, am I really hungry? So the mindfulness that would be directed towards the body at that point would be saying to them categorically, no, I'm not. And actually, we ate that meal. That was a full meal less than an hour ago. But the person is not there. They're definitely not mindful, and they're just going on habitual patterns of behavior. So they make something into something that it is not. As we, so the person's suffering is also, you know, it comes in different levels. So they are very much related with the level of understanding or lack of. So a person who develops in the practice can get to such a level where they might not be, for all intents and purposes, be, seen as suffering. But when they do see the hindrances, suddenly the level of suffering goes, off the charts, because the level of subtlety of them becoming aware of is now increased, has been advancing, thanks to their awareness level increasing. So the things that used to bother them, they don't bother them anymore. Like case in point, the Venerable Sāriputta. I mean, ever since I came across that reference of him being struck in the back by this person, I always played in the back of my mind, like, what would you do, mister? Talking to myself. Imagine somebody hitting you. Like, I'm a big guy. I can take him out. All these things, would I, like, how dare you type of a thing? Would I at the very least, turn around and check out who did what to me? Or maybe they're coming back for a second to hit me again, or harder, maybe with a steel rod or something. So you see, the wisdom is not Venerable Sāriputta's wisdom. Where you have Venerable Sāriputta, on the other hand, he's being struck. Meanwhile, his followers are like, their jaws dropped. They're like, did this just happen to our teacher? Because he didn't just walk on the streets and on his Pindapada where everybody ignored him. This was, and he would have his own row of students following him, because he was their teacher, he was their guide, he was their mother. So the level of tolerance goes up also. So, and it's very much connected, coming back to your question, it is related to the level of wisdom that is there or is developing, that will become able to distinguish between what is really pertinent and important, deserving of my attention at this moment or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course, because when you are a child or an adult or an older person, your attention is usually, it's different, directed toward different things. Some things you can let go, some things, like a leaky body, for instance. Usually, children don't have that, but as an older person, things fall apart. So, you do have your attention is focused differently. Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Was there another question, comment, raised hand somewhere? In that case, I would like to ask, how did this, or did it help you in any way, this sutta that we covered today? Did it impact you, influence you? How would you remember this sutta, etc.? Any thoughts?
So Bhante, I make notes of things as I hear talks, and so the main note that I have written today is the part about those 9 factors, and the earth accepts all without becoming humiliated or disgusted at all by any of it. And I think that's a very poignant thing for me to remember when I go about my life and I'm observing people who are doing things that I don't like or yelling at me and telling me I'm wrong. That's the thing to be mindful of, about accepting it and without being disgusted or humiliated in any way. That's the way to be mindful and to stop those emotions welling up. So I really appreciate that point.
So true, so true. It's that image, so powerful. It can move people to tears. Just, you know, especially that reference in the commentaries towards that's the Dhammapada verse, actually, 95, I think it was, where Lord Buddha says, the holy man, referring back to Venerable Sāriputta, says, is like the ocean, takes in everything, or like the earth, takes in everything, doesn't refuse, whether it's pus, whether it's feces, garbage, trash, or gold, diamonds. Makes no difference. And these are definitely things to inspire us when we are surrounded by individuals or situations where we are tested to the limit. And I don't know of anyone who is not tested to the limit, given the pressures that we are undergoing as a population, as human beings today. So yes, they're inspiring. Yes.
No, like Greg, I also was very moved by the metaphors of the water, the rag, the earth, and accepting things without a certain type of discrimination. It kind of occurred to me in a funny way, though, that since the whole world is, for instance, wearing a mask, these kind of mask with the COVID, and then I could just, I think it's already happening. You could see the ocean filled with billions of masks, and so then I kind of asked myself, in this time and age when we have so much, these masks are supposed to save people, yet I'm sure they will end up in the ocean and in the earth, and I'm not sure how soluble they are. Mm. So it kind of made me feel a little bit weird that the earth is taking the rap for this kind of thing, and that we couldn't maybe devise a better way, because I have these dreams of billions of masks, just covering the earth and the water. I mean, when I walk on the street, of course I see many discarded masks. Before it was condoms, now it's masks, or both, so it's just mind-boggling. So, I'm sure that this Sāriputta did not mean it in this, of course, in this particular way. It's more kind of metaphorical and moral, but I think the reality is that the earth and water may not be able to absorb everything, Anyway, it's just my odd comment, but yeah, I thought this particular lecture and the themes that were covered, it really is covers a whole universe. I think it actually brings the micro and the macro together. I mean, through rhetoric and through these, through the this call and response. It really is it's kind of like Plato or something like that, or asking questions, that kind of that kind of dialogue. So I thought it was really anyway, thank you.
Mm-hmm. The flavors that the world gives us, and the kileshas give us, the defilements, are very enticing, are very and they're so varied. They're so like they always are. There's always new ones coming in. And when we come to the Dhamma, we see that its flavors are unchanging, in a sense, in their significance, in their effect on us. And there's the Dhamma has many great flavors that the defilements try to mimic, to try to create the counterfeit versions of. And one of the flavors of the Dhamma is, you said the word moral, is sila, or abstaining from things that create suffering. Sila is the abstention from doing things that propagate more suffering. That's a huge flavor. That is a delicious flavor that the Dhamma has. The second flavor, or another flavor, is samadhi, purifying the mind to get it to a point where you are no longer susceptible to ways of thinking that you were subject to, or being overtaken by old tendencies or fears, etc. As you develop a deeper and deeper states of mind to get to a deeper understanding of life, of things, like you were saying about when we were children, or children have less tolerance of things. They want to cry when they don't get whatever they want, anytime they want, and you don't give them, they're going to start crying. And as they grow older, that becomes a little bit less, hopefully, and less and less. And then there's another flavor of the Dhamma, which is the renunciation, or nekkhamma. Think of it as disenchantment, for example. And then, well, what is disenchantment? It's in the previous sutta exploration we did, we saw how Venerable Mahamoggallana was asking for a very concise, short description of the teaching, something that encapsulates the essence of the teaching, and something that is applicable, quickly taking a person to the summum bonum of the Dhamma, which is Nibbāna. And that is when the Buddha says, not clinging to anything. That's another definition of renunciation. You don't have to shave your head or wear the robes to renounce. You can actually be much more attached to things with that kind of a lifestyle. It's just an outside thing. But renouncing nekkhamma through the mind, through our attitude, by not clinging to things, that's another delicious flavor of the Dhamma. And then there's the ultimate flavor of the Dhamma, which is the unprecedented penetration through the thick layers of ignorance or delusion, which is brought forth through insight, unsurpassable insight, unprecedented insight and wisdom, which we call it yatha bhutang jnana dassana. Having the ability to see and understand how things come to be, how things really are, which is like the litmus test of a person's own experience, whether they have experienced Nibbāna or not, because there is an absolute 100% complete change, transformation in the individual. But all these things require adequate amount of work to be done. It requires adequate work. You have to increase the temperature and leave the water on the stovetop over fire for a certain amount of time to reach a certain temperature in order for it to boil. Anything less, it won't do it. Similarly here, we need to have the adequate amount of energy put in, adequate amount of involvement and understanding in order for us to get to Magga Phala Nibbāna, path, fruit, and Nibbāna. And then one last thing, if I may add here. The Dhamma was not taught to dead people. It wasn't taught to people who were not yet born. The Dhamma was taught to beings who were alive when the Buddha or any of his disciples were teaching. So it is now the case. Hence, coming back to mindfulness directed to the body. So the Dhamma can only be taught and lived and practiced by those who are living, not dead. That's why it is relevant. That's why it is not something to be postponed or dreamed about. There's a huge, sadly, huge populations of Buddhists in the world who willingly, intentionally forego the work that needs to be done now by postponing their efforts and saying, you know what, I'm just going to do good work now, and by all probabilities, I'm going to be reborn in the heavenly realm, and when the next Buddha shows up, that's when I'm going to show up as a human being and to learn from him. You have huge populations of Buddhists who think like this, sadly. Well, what makes you think that you're going to be alive then? Or not an insect? Or a person who is, even if you're a human being, but somebody who is incapable of understanding, or on a different part of the planet at the time. Good luck. So let us not postpone and at the same time put in the adequate amount of energy needed. Just something if you want to explore further the mindfulness directed to the body part, that portion, that series, rather, there is a series of suttas. In fact, in the Anguttara Nikāya, there's several actually, but these are specifically dedicated to the title of mindfulness directed to the body, and they're in the hundreds, and they're in the Anguttara Nikāya, and in the Book of Ones, from Sutta 375, I believe, to 615 or 16, where the Buddha says how the way to experience Nibbāna is through mindfulness of the body, and also to experience the different levels of wisdom. And he doesn't start from Nibbāna, he starts from just wholesome and unwholesome. To avoid doing unwholesome things, if the person directs their attention to the body, those incidents will be less and less until they don't occur anymore. And similarly, when the person does not have enough wholesome actions being done, as they bring their attention to the body, then they cannot help but do wholesome actions, whether it's through their thoughts, words, and bodies. And it culminates into the deathless in the end of the Book of Ones in the Anguttara Nikāya. And then starts this from 616, I believe, right after that, this following section of suttas are on the deathless, interestingly arranged. So I recommend, even though I say they're in the hundreds, but they're very short suttas. And unfortunately, many of the translations that I've come across, they have a lot of those ellipses, dots. So in my recording that I've done last year of these suttas, they're in their complete version. So you can listen to them. I go through the whole repetitions again and again, because I find it extremely helpful and beneficial for practitioners to listen to the whole thing, because when the Buddha taught these, or his Sāvakas taught these, they didn't put ellipses. Because each repetition, like today, you discovered 9 times the same things were repeated. Pretty much same things. But whatever was missed in the previous paragraph might still be caught in the next one. And I wouldn't want us to deprive ourselves from that opportunity. Thank you for your presence and your participation, your questions, comments. And if there are any further comments, please don't hesitate to reach out and email me or sending me private messages. And I will try my best to respond soon. So let us share, dedicate the merits gained today. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sad, sad, sad. Be well, and I'll see you next time. I think from the list, from what I recall, it will be Anuruddha Sutta the next time. In 2 weeks, we'll cover Anuruddha Sutta. It is, let me see, Sutta number 3. I'm sorry, Book of 3, Book of the Threes, Sutta number 130. So, Book of the Threes of the Anguttara Nikāya Numerical Discourses, Sutta number 130. And I will ask Dhammadina to send you the link to this recording that I've done. And of course, you always please make use of other resources in written form of these suttas to benefit from. May you be well. May the blessings of the Triple Gem be with you. And may you be safe and practice with the adequate amount of energy and effort and wisdom. May you be successful. Sukhi hotu.
Sadhu, sadhu.